We have some depressing new information to share with you today about just how much we really believe in liberal values as a country. Huffington Post reports here. In response to the recent terrorist attack in Brussels, Republican frontrunner Donald Trump has called for expanding the use of waterboarding and more extreme methods of torture in order to extract information from suspected terrorists. Most Americans agree with Trump. 63% of Americans think that torturing suspected terrorists can be a justified way to get information, according to a new Reuters Ipsos poll. 63% of Americans are pro-torture. It says we should torture to extract information from suspected terrorists. So the American people are like, yeah, go ahead. It's like, wait, this is a suspected terrorist. It's an alleged terrorist. We don't know. We think maybe it is. Yeah, I don't care. Torture anyway. So 63% of the American people would have done what the Bush administration did and what Cheney did at Guantanamo Bay and at Abu Ghraib after 9/11. For those of you who don't know the story, it's an amazing story. So after 9/11, the Bush administration reached out to governments in Afghanistan and Pakistan and said, hey, we need you guys to send us jihadists because we just got attacked here and we got to exact some revenge and we got to prevent something from happening again, so send us the jihadists. What did those governments do? Well, they had warlords round people up and ship them to us. Now, they weren't people who were actually jihadists. They were people who the government disliked and the warlords disliked. Rival factions. Round up the civilians, ship them out to Gitmo and Abu Ghraib and elsewhere. And then what happened? We tortured those people and we locked them up indefinitely. And what did those governments say and those warlords say? Yeah, those are jihadists. That's Al-Qaeda. We got them. You think they give a shit about human rights? You think there was some sort of due process set up over there to get the right people? Of course not. So we shipped them to the U.S., and they were suspected terrorists. People thought, guilty enough. Guilty enough. Hey, they're brown skinned. They were sent over here. We were just attacked on 9/11. Guilty enough. And then we tortured them. We locked them up indefinitely. They had no rights whatsoever. And 63% of the American people say, fuck yeah. Suspected terrorists. How do you know? How do you know if it's a terrorist? How do you know? It wasn't adjudicated. There was no due process. There's no habeas corpus. There's no constitutional system set up. It's extrajudicial. So anybody can grab somebody and say, terrorist. Imagine that was somebody in your fucking family. Imagine it was somebody in your family. How would you feel about that? All of a sudden, no, human rights. We need human rights. Oh, so when it's you, human rights for me and for everybody I know. But when it's somebody else and they're over there and they're brown skin and I don't know, somebody says they might be guilty. Enough, that's enough. They're suspected terrorists. Torture them and get the information. And furthermore, this naive idea, like the show 24 is right, like every Steven Seagal or Chuck Norris movie you saw is spot on. Where, well, obviously, everybody knows information if they're a suspected terrorist. No. If they're a suspected terrorist, they're just a terrorist in the minds of these people. And obviously, they know about future plots that are going to attack Cleveland in roughly 43 minutes. You got to torture them to get the answer. You're not in a movie, dipshit. You're in real life. And when you start torturing people, and when you start violating international law and human rights and the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunals, you become a bad guy too. See, here's the difference between us and these people. I actually believe in liberal values. I don't just say it. I actually believe in liberal values. I believe in human rights. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in due process of law. Why? Because we're humans. We're fallible. We make mistakes. So you have to have a process set up to determine guilt or innocence. And obviously, you don't torture because once you open that door, there's no going back. And it's never like, hey, we allowed torture, and look at that. We only managed to torture in the exact right scenario where there's a ticking time bomb, the 1 in a million circumstances where there's a ticking time bomb. No, when you open the door to torture, you know what happens? Exactly what happened in the United States. Did you read the Senate torture report? Waterboarding became maybe some sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation became maybe some mock burials. That became, hey, maybe we rough them up a little bit and punch them and fuck them up. Then that became, maybe we do some hypothermia torture, which is you pour cold water on them, leave them in a cold cell, and walk out. Somebody who we did that to died. On top of that, we learned later, totally innocent of all charges. wasn't a terrorist, anything. We killed an innocent person because we did hypothermia torture. And then finally, next thing you know, you're doing anal rape torture. You're doing anal feeding. Shove a tube up his ass because he won't eat, and shove liquid food up there, which leads to abrasions and cuts and infections, and it's something that when you talk to medical experts, they go, that's not really a thing. Do that, but it's okay because we're the good guys. At what fucking point are you not a good guy? At what point are you not a good guy? Is it just that everything you do is right by definition? Well, that's exactly how every single brutal, treacherous, murderous regime acted throughout history. That's exactly what they think. You think any empire ever got up in the morning, any leader of any empire ever got up and looked in the mirror and said, you're a fucking dick. You're the bad guy. Do you know that? No, they all woke up and looked in the mirror and said, I'm nailing it. Fucking Benito Mussolini looked in the mirror and said, I'm the one who's bringing justice and truth to the world. That's what I'm doing. 63% of the American people say, torture? Sure. And this is one of the biggest problems with the Bush administration and the Obama administration, is that now it's just a different opinion. That's it. There used to be moral red lines. Hey, you don't do this. We're the civilized people. We're the good people. We don't do this. We don't do this. It used to be, that's illegal, end of the conversation because we're the good guys. Now it's the neocons and the Bush administration, Cheney, let's make it an option. And then Obama comes in, we don't look backwards, we look forwards. We don't prosecute war criminals. We don't prosecute people who torture. Now it's just another opinion, and it's an opinion that the overwhelming majority of the American people agree with. You've become the devil you're trying to avoid. Donald Trump said in a recent interview with Fox News, we should attack civilians in the Middle East. We should target them. Get the family members of ISIS, not ISIS, the family members. Grandmas, toddlers, go right ahead. What happened after he said that? He went up in the polls. He just said, we just covered the story today. Ready for this? Here's his quote. The problem is we have the Geneva Conventions. All sorts of rules and regulations so the soldiers are afraid to fight. The Geneva Conventions protects wartime prisoners, the wounded and the sick. It establishes protections for civilians. He's saying the thing that protects civilians, that's the problem. This is the nation we want to be. And then we want to look in the mirror and say, oh, we are the world policemen. We're the ones spreading morality and virtue around the world. We're the ones spreading freedom and democracy. No, we've become like every other empire in history. You've gotten sloppy, you forget about your values, you forget about your principles, and you violate them when it's inconvenient because, we mean well, so that's good enough. It's not good enough. If you're like me, just say, I don't just use liberal values and constitutional rights and human rights as a talking point. I actually mean it. And if you're not willing to stick to your value system when the going gets tough, you never really believed in it in the first place. And that means you're a lot more like the bad guys than you'd like to admit.